Hey everybody, we are talking about the patient with a life-threatening illness. This module is difficult because we often don't want to talk about death and dying and really life-threatening diseases in general. But it's very important because we will be working with many patients that are facing these illnesses that are going to shorten their lifespan. So it's important to understand their choices, what's available, what kind of choices they have, and the factors that are influencing those choices. So let's think about what kind of choices patients are often given when they're diagnosed with these life-threatening illnesses. So they're often given treatments, right? And these can be various types of treatment. Sometimes it's medications, blood transfusions, artificial nutrition and hydration, respirators, so ventilators, things that actually keep them breathing, different types of surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, dialysis. All of these are different types of treatment, right? But patients can choose not to have any treatment. Sometimes you'll hear about elderly individuals diagnosed with cancer that choose not to be treated, right? Because they want to continue their last days not being sick from chemotherapy treatments and just living each day as to the fullest that they can. And so this is really the choice of the patient. They have their ultimate decision on how they live their life and what treatment choices, if any, that they want to choose. So one choice that's often not talked about as much as it probably should be is called palliative care. Palliative care. And this focuses on the quality of life of the patient by relieving symptoms. So one symptom that often occurs with any type of life-threatening illness is pain. Cancer can cause pain, HIV, renal disease, liver disease. There's often a lot of pain and suffering that goes along with this. So palliative care just focuses on relieving those symptoms. So relieving pain, allowing them to live their best life instead of trying to focus on the disease itself. So not focusing on treating the disease, but treating the symptoms that are debilitating and reducing that quality of life for the patient. There's actually a growing group of individuals that are choosing not to eat or drink or sustain any nutritional substances in their body to allow for a more natural death. And realize that this is the choice of the patient, right? They get to make those choices at the end of life on how they want to die, right? Total sedation can sometimes be sought when dying patients experience unbearable suffering and when their bodies don't respond to other treatments. So if a patient is horribly in pain, they're just going to be miserable. They'll often give sedatives to help ease that pain so that the patient doesn't have to suffer at end of life. There's also an increasing number of states that there is an option for aid in dying. It's also known as like physician-assisted suicide. And so this is obviously very controversial. This law varies state by state. In Tennessee, it is not legal. But in other states, Oregon and other states, often on the West Coast, they do have some of these options where the patient is allowed to make that decision that they'd like to end their own life on their terms. And a physician assists by providing medication that is prescribed to the patient to end their life. Obviously, there are more factors that have to be considered. There's, different clauses and things like that, and documents that have to be signed for this to occur. But just realize that with life-threatening illnesses, that there doesn't have to be a lot of suffering. There doesn't have to be endless amount of treatments, and that the patient can make the decision on how they want to live their life and the treatment options they want to pursue. So let's take a look here when death is imminent. So when we know end of life or when we've been diagnosed with these life-threatening illnesses, we can see here in this graph that there's a model for this end-of-life care. So we often have the diagnosis, and one that's easy to think about is cancer, right? So in the beginning, a lot of times with cancer, they're going to try and cure it with any type of efforts that they can, right? Chemo, radiation, surgery, immunotherapy, all of those different items. They're going to do any of these life-prolonging therapies that they can. But at the same time, they may start on palliative care, right? They're trying to help the symptoms of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy makes you really, really nauseous. And cancers can also have lots of symptoms as well. So this palliative care, the symptom control, is ongoing from diagnosis to death. So just thinking through that. But in the beginning, we're going to need a lot of, we may be seeking a lot of treatment options here and trying to cure the disease. As you'll notice, along with palliative care, there's also family support through this entire process, right? Family is crucial for individuals suffering with life-threatening illnesses, and this includes friends, right? Oftentimes, families are inclusive of friendships that are going to be helpful in supporting the individual. But you'll see here, as we go from diagnosis to recurrence, we often start adding in preparation for death. So let's say we have cancer, maybe the tumor has shrank, and then we go back 6 months later and it's back and has spread to lymph nodes, right? And reoccurrence of this life-threatening illness begins, and so we start more mentally preparing for death, maybe even physically preparing by preparing a will, and again, controlling the symptoms, having that family support and preparation as we near death. And so oftentimes once it becomes uncurable, or they realize that the treatment options are not working, they'll focus on the death preparation, palliative care, and family support. And as you see here with death at the bottom, we need to continue that support, because at the end of life, the patient's life is ending. However, those support individuals, the friends, the family members, even the caregivers, are going to need support in the loss of a loved one, right? And so that's where bereavement support comes into play. This is kind of a model of that end-of-life care and thinking through how that works. And then one last thing I want to mention is how death and dying is kind of viewed in our contemporary society. So dying is a personal experience. So think about how you want to die, how individuals maybe that you, your loved ones have experienced death. It's all individual, right? There's no one way that we all die, right? It's all different. Everyone has some awareness that the end of the dying process is the death event, right? So we all know that as we're dying, the end result will be death and the end of life. But it feels unnatural, right? It feels like an imposition, like something that shouldn't happen, something that is unthinkable, right? But we all are aware of it, but we still kind of fight it to some extent. So a life-threatening condition generates new fears and concerns, right? Especially in regards to this dying process, the unknown of death, right? What's to occur afterwards. There's a lot of fear and concerns around this, but also loss of independence and increase in disability in this process of suffering with a life-threatening illness. For some, they see it as an opportunity, though, to conduct long-neglected business. So they may have been putting off writing their will or connecting with long-lost family members, putting their affairs in order, or even postponing an adventure. You'll hear about people that are diagnosed with cancer or terminal illness, and they go on a world trip right around the world and do the things that they never had an opportunity to do. So some people do see it more as an opportunity versus just focusing on the fear and the dying process. But for most, death remains an ultimate mystery. However, this can be altered by our culture and our beliefs and our attitudes towards death, but ultimately we all don't know what happens afterwards, and so it's important to be respectful that there are going to be concerns and fears, and that people have different beliefs and thoughts about death and dying in our society.